Okay, let's get this going. Um, let's go ahead and repost to get as many people in as we can. And also, I did want everybody to know that there was a update to Reload, if you have an Apple at least. And it kicked me out of the space before I even started because I didn't look first. I should have known. Um, so
I might have to try that and probably have you drop me down and bring
Well,
me
let's
back up.
just see. I mean,
Okay.
if it's everything's working for you, but you definitely needed to do that in order to create one because as soon as I hit create, the bubble went away. I couldn't share it, and it just like dropped the entire thing. So, um,
That makes
anyway, it is what it is. Okay, so just for review, we're going to take a second and kind of go over, in case you missed yesterday's, what was going on in the 1968 campaign, in which you had basically um, a wide open field once let me get my timeline here so I don't screw it up. You had late 1967 McCarthy, Eugene McCarthy, out of nowhere, kind of announces his presidency run, and he was actually going to um, run against the incumbent Johnson, LBJ, for president, which is very rare, and not unlike what RFK did this time. RFK's dad um, sees Eugene McCarthy being able to gain um, traction against LBJ because of the Vietnam War, which we're going to touch on, and was able to significantly challenge LBJ in the New Hampshire primary. And so RFK decides to throw his hat in the ring, and basically the two of them are kind of the runaway, gaining lots of traction. At the end of January, the Tet Offensive, which I'm going to cover, happens and blows LBJ's chance of reelection, actually, because um, the whole 67 leading into 68 had been anti-war movements all the time, and they had kept saying over and over, oh, we're winning, oh, we're winning, and we've all heard that. That's the standard military industrial complex mantra, which I'm going to bring home today on why um, LBJ sacrificed so many of our citizens on the altar of the military industrial complex, because what I'm going to get in today is going to blow your mind. Then Nixon announces on the 1st of February. Wallace announces on the 8th of February. So now we have the field set between a viable competitor, McCarthy, gaining on LBJ, Nixon on the opposite side of the aisle. Wallace comes in as a third party candidate, the spoiler. And then you have the March 12th New Hampshire primary, where LBJ, as the incumbent, barely squeaks it out over McCarthy. That vulnerability is like blood in the water. And RFK jumps in a few days later. As we're going to see, there's other extenuating circumstances going on. And by the end of March, LBJ is out. A week later, MLK is killed. That's the George Floyd impetus for riots everywhere. We talked about that and how the Weather Underground and some of their CIA inspired activists infiltrate many of the different organizations and basically just set the whole country on fire that summer. And
Ma'am, can you please drop President out and bring her back up as co-host?
sure.
Jeez. Thank you.
And then we have after LBJ drops out at the end of March, at the end of April, Humphreys, who is the vice president to LBJ, enters the race. Now, because he enters the race in April, he basically is not on any ballots in any primary. So, not unlike what they're doing right now with Kamala Harris. And as within a month and a half, the continued momentum of McCarthy and RFK is just, it's on steroids. So Humphrey, he can't compete because he missed the registration. RFK's on a roll. He wins California, which basically seals the deal for him as being the candidate on the Democrat side. And that night, that very night that he wins, he's murdered. He's assassinated. So that's the second assassination. You have MLK and then you have RFK. And at the beginning of August, Nixon wraps up the nomination for the Republican side. And at the end of August, they have their convention in the exact same city they're having it this year, Chicago. And Humphreys, even though McCarthy has actually gotten electorals all the time, all the way through this entire season, Humphrey ends up with the nomination out of the convention. So not unlike what's exactly happening this year, which is the similarities are just crazy to this story. And there's a lot more detail. If you guys missed the show yesterday, I'd suggest you go back and get it because it has details on the CIA's involvement in the Nixon campaign and a lot of other gems. So that kind of takes us up to where we're going to start today. I briefly wanted to, because it's so relevant to today with the Ukraine disaster, I wanted to briefly go over the Tet Offensive in 1968. And again, it happened on the 30th of January, 1968. So right in the middle of the beginnings of the primary season. And basically what that was, I'm going to just read you a little bit from an article that was written by James Wilbanks. And it basically says it was a turning point of the Vietnam War. It changed the entire way the United States approached the war. Before the Tet Offensive, the U.S. objective in Vietnam was to win, which I disagree with. Our presence there was always to create the ability to traffic drugs out of there. After the Tet Offensive, the U.S. was basically in a how do we get out of here by saving face. Fully understand the impact of the Tet Offensive, you have to go to the previous year of 1967, where we had spent 2 years of fighting at that point with increasing casualties. And basically, what had happened in the lead up to the Tet Offensive is that the North Vietnamese had tricked the U.S., the CIA, and the U.S. military, which was being overseen by General Westmoreland in Vietnam. And they had basically kind of decided that they were going to begin this cut by paper cuts, cut death by 1,000 cuts, and start attacking a bunch of small villages on the very outskirts of all around Vietnam. And by doing that, they decentralized the presence of U.S. forces out of the major urban areas, which is where they had been congregated for protection purposes, into the outermost reaches of Vietnam. And basically faked an attack, not unlike they did to the French. And in doing that, in the couple of days leading up to the January 30th Tet Offensive beginning, they looked like they were overcoming the border into South Vietnam in one particular area that they had used heavily as this kind of shell game with the US. And Westmoreland was convinced, based on flawed CIA information, which I have my own opinions of that. But anyway, Westmoreland's story is that he believed that was going to be the major thrust into that area. So he shifted a bunch of more forces into that area. And then all hell broke loose when the North Vietnam launched an all-out major campaign in all of the urban areas, which were at minimum protection now because of the months leading up in this distraction campaign that the North had orchestrated. And basically, it left the US with their pants down and devastating results in the urban areas. And as a result of that, you have some difference of opinions of like the tactical level success versus the operational level, but just understand that that Tet Offensive was the major turning point. It was the revelation to the US population that they had been lied to, just like we now know everything about the Ukraine situation is a lie. This is not the first lie our government has told us. It won't be the last lie our government has told us. Everything about Vietnam was a lie. But the Tet Offensive is like the key revelation. It was the day that the curtain on the guy standing behind pretending to be Oz was drawn back. As a result of that, you have basically February where the fallout happens, and then at the end of March, LBJ withdraws from the race. So it had a significant impact on because he couldn't recover. I mean, he had lied his entire time conducting this operation. So that I wanted to explain that so people understand just how important that was. And also, we're going to talk towards the end as I lay this out, the deep ties to the military industrial complex, to include murders revolving around the letting of contracts that LBJ was involved in. LBJ, and it's funny because most people don't talk about this since we have so many after him, like the Clintons. LBJ had a lot of dead bodies around him, a lot of dead bodies. We're going to talk about a few of those today. I want to introduce the guy that was basically his assassin. This is just, to me, a crazy story. I came across this story several months ago when we were looking at the OAS's involvement in the JFK assassination. So let me just briefly tell you what that is, and then you can match that up with what we're about to tell you. So in the defense contracting business, it is used for a lot of different nefarious things. And so those of you who've been following me for a long time know that in the aftermath of World War II, NATO hired Otto Skorzeny to be a trainer for Operation Gladio. And they basically had originally put him in Paris, but then when they got kicked out, he got exposed, recognized. He had to go to Spain. And he sets up shop in Spain. And Spain is a fascist government at the time. So Franco's in charge of Spain. And the US, in order to pay Otto Skorzeny to be their mentor assassin, if you will, because he basically went around and set up Operation Gladio training sites and became a mentor and a planner for many of the heads of state assassinations that they did for like the next 20 years. And so the way they paid Otto Skorzeny was the Air Force, which was a newly created organization after World War II, had just there was an agreement that the US CIA had kind of orchestrated this agreement that the US through the Air Force contracting office, because it was new and didn't have historical accounts and stuff like that, so it's easier to hide this, was going to be the executive agency to build bases for the US in Spain. Now, we didn't have any bases in Spain because Spain was a fascist dictator. You know, we being the big republic and all about freedom. If we had had a base in Spain, it would have been closed. But because we're going to use it as a money laundering opportunity, everything about every foreign policy that we have ever had was thrown out the window. And we're going to go build a whole bunch, not just one or two bases in Spain while it's being managed by a fascist dictator who kills a lot of people. So the contracts were let for a whole lot more money than what it actually cost to build the bases. And Otto Skorzeny just so happened to have a partner that they co-owned a construction company that was paid by the US Air Force to build bases. The problem was, and it was later discovered, that it only cost, like 20% of what these contracts were let for to actually build the bases. The rest of the money was Otto Skorzeny's payment for being a trained and planner assassin for Operation Gladio. So you have to understand how they use these contracts for nefarious purposes. And that's just a glaring example of just one in order to understand the significance of what I'm about to tell you. Because that was pennies compared to what I'm about to tell you. So this guy that we're going to introduce you to, his name's Malcolm Wallace. Malcolm Wallace was an economist for the Department of Agriculture. And on 1951, Wallace kills a guy by the name of John Kinser, Kinser, at the clubhouse of the Austin golf course that Kinser actually owned. Now, there's differing opinions on why he killed them. Some say that he was so rumors are, because there's like 3 different versions of it, that Kinser, who was 33 years old and was having an affair with Wallace's wife while Wallace was working in Washington, D.C. That's one story, but that's not the only story. There's another story that included LBJ's sister being involved with as well. And we may or may not get to that one, but let's just say there's a whole bunch of sleeping around going on. And there are also suggestions that there was a lot more behind the scenes going on, and that was then used as a defense after he shot them, like stuff more nefarious going on. But anyway, be that as may, there's a dead body. There were witnesses. When they heard the gunshot, several of the golfers actually saw the guy got the license plate number. He's picked up. So there's really no question about whether or not he did it. And he eventually, let's just get to that part. He eventually gets convicted of it. His defense was, something to the effect that it was, crime in the passion, all of that kind of garbage. But he supposedly got convicted and sentenced to a big, long prison sentence. But I have to get back to that particular one because I'm like about 5 people into this story. Because this is just the craziest story ever. Okay, here we go. So let me tell you a little bit about him. He was part of the U.S. Marine Corps, and he was discharged, returned to Texas. He actually was part of the American Socialist Party originally. And he marries a Methodist preacher's daughter, Mary DeBose Barton. He was basically going to Columbia University to get a law degree. And Edward Clark introduces Wallace to LBJ in 1950. And that's when he begins working at the Department of Agriculture in Texas. So in this story, Wallace began having an affair with LBJ's sister, Josepha Johnson. And she also was having a relationship with John Kinzer at the golf course. So Kinzer starts asking, according to reports, asking Josepha to ask her brother to give him basically a loan, some money, whatever. And basically tells him to pound sand. And Kinzer then asked Josepha if he could have a loan as opposed to just money. So Johnson at this point thinks he's being blackmailed, and he mentions it to Mac Wallace, and Mac Wallace goes and shoots him and kills him. And then Wallace gets charged with murder. He gets released on bail after Edward Clark, same guy that introduced him to Johnson, arranges for 2 of Johnson's financial supporters, a guy by the name of M.E. Ruby and Bill Carroll, to post bonds on behalf of the defendant. Johnson's attorney, John Coffer, who he has his own story, becomes Mac's attorney, which is kind of weird that you just kind of like loan out your attorney for some guy that you just happen to work with. So Wallace resigns from his government job because of course he's charged with murder at this point. And Wallace decides that he's not going to testify. And Coffer basically says, yeah, he killed him, but hey, he was sleeping with Wallace's wife and blah, blah, blah. So the jury found him guilty, and so 11 of them want him to have the death penalty. The other guy says life imprisonment, so it has to go to the judge for decisions. So this judge, just out of nowhere, overrules the jury, gives him 5 years imprisonment and a suspended sentence. So he basically just walks out of the jail for free. So big shenanigans there, not unlike it is today. And so basically the jurors felt so bad after what happened, they call Kinzer's parents and apologize for the fact that they weren't able to come to an agreement. And they basically announced to everybody, to include the family and the police, that they received death threats from serving on that jury. So Edward Clark basically meets LBJ and arranges for Wallace to get a job at an aircraft corporation. It's called LTV. LTV it's got its own story, and we won't have time for it today, but let's just say it has some nefarious people involved in it, from buying airplanes almost like on the black market. and is heavily involved in the oil industry. So a guy by the name of Henry Marshall was asked by the Agricultural Adjustment Administration to investigate the activities of a guy that they all know by the name of Billy Estes. Marshall, the investigator, discovered that Estes, who's a friend of LBJ's and all of these people, Wallace's, all of them, was going around purchasing cotton allotments and then basically getting money from the government for the production or not producing, in some cases, cotton on all of these cotton allotments. So basically, he's scamming the government by giving people money for their allotments and then getting more money from the government. So he's skimming money off of the government, basically. And this is all happening in the early 1960s. So again, while Lyndon B. Johnson is soon to be in the White House, this is all going on. And then at a meeting on 17 January, which literally would be right before they take office, 1961, Marshall, the investigator, tells Dennison that Estes was clearly involved in a scheme. And Marshall was disturbed that as a result of sending a report to Washington, he was basically offered to be moved. He was offered a promotion, like they're trying to get him out from investigating this. So he decides not to take the promotion. Well, that pissed them all off. So, according to Billy Estes, they had a meeting with a guy by the name of Clifton Carter, LBJ, about Mr. Marshall, the investigator. Johnson suggested that Marshall be promoted, and they tell him, hey, we already tried that. He won't take the job. So then Estes, LBJ, and Carter have another meeting, and they're talking about that. And basically, Mac Wallace is given the hit job to assassinate this government investigator. So on the 3rd of April, 3rd of June, 1961, Marshall is found dead on his farm beside his truck. There's a rifle laying beside him. He was shot 5 times with his own rifle. The local sheriff designates that as a suicide. Not kidding. Shot 5 times. What they had done was shot him, and then they had hooked up this piece of cloth to the truck exhaust and tried to make it look like so what people believe is that they knocked him out. They tried to hook it up to make it look like he committed suicide from the gas exhaust, because this is a method they use repeatedly. They've killed multiple people. Where again, we won't have time to go into all of them, but they've used this in multiple assassination hits. And evidently, he either woke back up and started fighting them or whatever, and that's when he gets shot with his own rifle. And so the Marshall's wife and his brother refused to accept the fact and that he committed suicide, because they know he didn't. And they offer a reward for anybody helping find the murderer. So the undertaker, who basically processed his body, says, it looked to me like a murder. I just don't believe a guy can shoot himself 5 times. And later on, the undertaker's son said, Daddy said he told the judge there was no way Mr. Marshall could have killed himself. Daddy's seen suicides. We see a lot of suicides, but in this case, Daddy said Judge Farmer told him he was going to put suicide on the death certificate because the sheriff told him to. So that's what he did. Well, his wife hired an attorney, and basically um, went about changing the cause of death. So one man who did believe that Marshall had been murdered was Texas Ranger Clint Peoples. He had reported to Colonel Homer Garrison, the director of the Texas Department of Public Safety. He said it was utterly impossible for him to have taken his own life. Peoples also interviewed a gas station attendant in the local area who gave them a rough sketch of what the guy looked like, which was exactly like Mac Wallace. So in the spring of 1962, again, this is well into the administration, Billy Estes was arrested by the FBI on fraud and conspiracy charges. Soon afterwards, it was disclosed by the Secretary of Agriculture, Orville Freeman, that Henry Marshall, the investigator, had been a key figure in the investigation into Billy Estes, cohort of LBJ. So you've got a grand jury that is ordered to exhume and perform an autopsy on Mr. Marshall, the investigator. 8 hours of examination. The autopsy comes back that he was absolutely murdered. And in April 1962, Estes' chief accountant, a guy by the name of George Krutilek, Krutilek, was found dead. He had severe bruises on his head, but the coroner decided he committed suicide too, even though everybody knew he had not. The very next day, Estes and 3 business partners are indicted by a federal grand jury, along with a guy by the name of Harold Orr and Coleman Wade. However, Harold Orr and Coleman Wade don't make it to trial because they also die. And supposedly, they committed suicide. But later, Estes claims that Mac Wallace murdered them too. All of these dead bodies to protect LBJ. And just in case you guys don't know, LBJ used all of these same people, which is the irony of this, to cheat in order to get into the Senate to begin with. So he was never actually elected to the Senate. He cheated. That all came out in a completely different investigation. And all of these names that I'm throwing around now are all of the people that were involved in this cheat. So, Leonard Williams, who was the assistant to Mr. Marshall, the investigator, testified about the evidence that the department had acquired on Estes. Orville Freeman also admitted that Marshall was the man who left this world under questionable circumstances. Yeah, like he was assassinated by LBJ hitman. Okay, so it was later discovered that 3 other officials in the Agricultural Adjustment Administration in Washington received bribes from Billy Estes. Their names, Red Jacobs, Jim Ralph, and Bill Morris, were all fired. Bill Estes was in September 1961, he was fined $42,000 for stealing the cotton allotments, which is like pennies on the dollar. And 2 months later, Freeman, the guy that we were just talking about, who also admitted that Marshall was a man who left the world, so he's one of these officials. He appoints Estes to the National Cotton Advisory Board. So not only did he get off scot-free, other than the $42,000 fine, which was pennies compared to what he had already stolen from the government, he gets appointed to a national board. It also was revealed that Estes told Wilson Tucker, who was the deputy director of the Agricultural Department Cotton Division in August 1961, that he threatened to embarrass the Kennedy administration if the investigation on himself was not halted. So obviously blackmail material. As Tucker pointed out, this was 6 months before the questions about Marshall's death had even been raised. So this is the part that I want you guys to just kind of stick in the back of your brain and know that the FBI has always been corrupt. FBI agent Tommy McWilliams was involved in the investigation of Mr. Marshall because, again, he's working for the federal government when he's assassinated. So McWilliams, in his report, came to the conclusion that Marshall had indeed committed suicide by shooting himself 5 times. He wrote in his report, quote, "My theory was that he shot himself and then realized he wasn't dead," unquote. He then claimed that he had tried to kill himself after shooting himself 5 times by inhaling carbon monoxide. That's actually in an FBI report. So that's...
Doesn't that sort of sound like there was someone who went over the Clintons recently, in the last few years that
I think the Clintons... Deceased, yeah, I think the Clintons got their pointers from LBJ.
Yeah, because they got shot 3 times and then he hung himself.
Yes. I think they got their pointers from LBJ. So, absolutely. Even Hoover was not impressed with that theory. He wrote in a memo in May of 1962, "I just can't understand how one can fire 5 shots at himself." So,
I don't know how they can write that with a straight face.
They didn't. They did it because they were paid to do it or blackmailed into doing it. All right. So, there was another FBI agent who had disagreed with the FBI report. He believed that the bruise on Marshall's forehead was caused by a severe blow to the head, blah, blah, blah. So Robinson County grand jury continued to investigate the death of Marshall. And basically, it says they were people involved in this were disturbed by the news that the grand jury member, Price Metcalf, was dominating the proceedings internal to the grand jury because Metcalf was County Sheriff Howard Stiegel, the guy who ordered the death certificate to say suicide's son-in-law. In April 1962, George Krutelek, who was Estes' chief accountant, we talked about, had been found dead, and he also had a bruise on his head. And the fact that they had been arrested the next day because they needed to have their accountant, out of the way so he couldn't testify against them. So when Estes appears before his grand jury, he's accompanied by John Coffer, the lawyer that represented LBJ, when he was accused in the ballot rigging election way back in 1948. Mac Wallace, and Mac Wallace was, and Mac Wallace's attorney as well, sorry. Tommy McWilliams of the FBI appeared before the grand jury and basically did his, blah, blah, blah. I think he suicided himself by shooting himself 5 times. So that's actually part of the grand jury evidence as well. And of course, they had the coroner there and said that he had looked at 15,000 dead bodies and never once saw anybody that committed suicide by shooting themselves 5 times. So anyway, this whole thing kind of sets the tone for where we're going to go next. But understanding that this is all going on in 1962, And the next year is when JFK is assassinated. So it is later, McClellan later claimed that the killing of Kennedy was paid for by oil millionaire Clint Murchison and Harrelson Hunt. And Harrelson Hunt and Murchison basically are like the two dominant oil figures in Dallas at the time. And there was a lot of stuff going on about oil and the freeing up of the African countries, and that's how all of this is all connected. And the non-interventionist approach of JFK threatened to cut in on literally hundreds of billions of dollars in contracts overseas if you give them freedom and they're able to negotiate better contracts for themselves. And so they were not all about that. It says that Wallace, this assassin, went to work for Harry Lewis and the L&G Oil Company, and that he began pressing Edward Clark, the guy that we were just talking about, for more money for having been involved in the JFK assassination. And according to Barr McClellan, it was then decided to kill Wallace. He had to be eliminated. After driving to see his daughter in Texas, he went to the L&G's office in Longview, Texas. There was exhaust there. His exhaust was rigged for part of it to flow into his car. In January 1971, Malcolm Wallace was killed while driving to Pittsburgh, Texas. He had fallen asleep on the road and crashed his car and died of massive head injuries. Soon afterwards, Clifton Carter died at age 53. In 1971, also the year Billy Estes was due to leave prison. So they're getting them all done away with before he gets out of jail and starts ratting them all out. According to Clint Peoples, a Texas Ranger, Billy Estes had promised to tell the full story of Henry Marshall's death once he got out of jail because he was afraid to talk in jail, afraid he'd get killed. So this is a key part right here. In August 1984, Estes' lawyer, Douglas Caddy, wrote to a man named Stephen Trott of the U.S. Department of Justice. In the letter, Caddy claimed that Wallace, Billy Estes, LBJ, and Cliff Carter had been involved in the murders of Henry Marshall, George Krutalik, Harold Orr, Ike Rogers, Coleman Wade, Josepha Johnson, John Kinzer, and JFK. Caddy added, Mr. Estes is willing to testify that LBJ ordered these killings and that he transmitted his orders through Cliff Carter to Mac Wallace, who executed the murders. In May 1998, Walt Brown called a press conference in Dallas to discuss a previously unidentified fingerprint at the sniper's nest at the book depository. According to Brown, this fingerprint had been identified as belonging to Wallace. In 2003, Barr McClellan published a book called Blood, Money, and Power: How LBJ Killed JFK. In this book, he argues that LBJ and Edward Clark were involved in the planning and cover-up of the assassination of JFK. McClellan also named Wallace as one of the assassins. The killing of Kennedy was paid for by oil millionaires Clint Murchison and Harold L. Hunt. McClellan claims that Clark got $2 million for his role in it. 31-year-old Mark Wallace stared intently at each of the 12 jurors as they filed into the courtroom. And this goes back to talking about the actual court. I don't think we need to do that. I mean, at this point, we know that he basically gets killed himself through his own preferred method of rigging up car exhaust into killing people. So anyway, I wanted to move on to this other guy that was involved in this story. And because it ties what I originally started talking about in Vietnam to this. So one of the guys in this story is a guy by the name of Fred Korth, Korth. He's also from Texas, and he was in the Army Air Corps during World War II. He's a member of the Democrat Party. He worked with John Connally to get LBJ elected in 1948. So he was part of the cheat. In 1952, Truman appointed Korth, Korth, as Assistant Secretary of the Army. He worked under Frank Pace. Now, Frank Pace, just so that you know, was a big deal. He ends up being like an assistant the assistant U.S. Attorney General. He was at one point the Postmaster General. He was sent over to Korea during the Korean War. He ends up being the CEO of General Dynamics. That's a big deal. He also was involved in this really weird thing that I just found out about called the Eisenhower 10. Eisenhower set up a continuity of government plan that had like 6 civilians and 3 generals that took charge if anything should ever happen to him. And I don't know why he would be at all worried about that, since he was just setting up the entire Operation Gladio scenario of killing all of the other heads of state. So just to be on the safe side, he decided to have a continuity of government plan set up where these 10 people would take over the government if it was ever decapitated through assassination. And he set up another thing, which I'm going to do a little bit more research into, called the International Executive Service Corps. Looks like a CIA front to me. This Pace guy did. And he also was the first chairman of the Corporate for Public Broadcasting, which we know is a front for the CIA. So just a little bit about him, because he's very important to this story. That's Frank Pace. Okay. So this guy that we're talking about, Korth's boss, is Frank Pace. So keep that in mind. Both men left office at the federal level in 1953. Pace becomes the CEO of General Dynamics. Korth goes back to his law practice, but he becomes a director on the board at Bell Aerospace Corporation, which is also in Fort Worth, Texas. And it's also a huge, big military industrial complex company. The chairman of the company, Lawrence Bell, was a fellow member of a group called Suite 8F Group. Suite 8F Group. You notice all of these like secret things going on. So this is another one of those. This group included Sam Rayburn, who was part of the Foreign Commerce Committee, and a whole bunch of political figures in Washington, D.C., to include the Department of Agriculture director, which everything I just told you about happened under the Department of Agriculture. Keep that in mind. And it's said by an author by the name of Robert Caro that Texans were elected on December 7th, 1931, not only to the speakership of the House, but to the chairman of 5 of the most influential committees. Lyndon Johnson's first day in the Capitol was the day Texas came to power over the federal government. And it stayed that way for over 30 years. So in other words, from 1931 to 1961, basically, Texas ran the country. So that's what this Suite 8F group is all about. And there's a whole long little iteration of how the corruption, it says Suite 8F helped coordinate the political activities of businessmen in the South, which included Robert Anderson of Midwest Oil and Gas, who became the Secretary of the Navy and the Secretary of the Treasury. Robert Kerr, who was part of Kerr-McGee Oil, Billy Estes, the guy that we just talked about that was embezzling money from the cotton industry, Glenn McCarthy of McCarthy Oil and Gas, Earl Smith of U.S. Sugar Corporation, Fred Karth, the guy we're talking about, who was running Continental National Bank and became Navy Secretary, Ross Sterling, Humble Oil, which had people in it, Sid Richardson, Texas oil millionaire, Clint Murchison, oil, Harold Hunt, oil, Eugene Germany, oil, David Byrd, Byrd Oil, Lawrence Bell, Bell Helicopters. Oh my God, I missed him when I looked at this before. William Pauley. William Pauley. Are you fucking kidding me? Oh my gosh. Okay, so William Pauley is the guy that owned the sugar plantations and all of the transportation in Cuba when we went down and basically overthrew the government of Cuba. And he is also the guy that gave that created the Air Force and Navy for Chiang Kai-shek over when we installed him in Taiwan to run the entire drug business. How did I miss William?
Andy's involved with the Liberty.
How did I miss? No, he wasn't involved with the Liberty. He's the guy that had his yacht that used for the invasion of Cuba.
But isn't the Liberty's address on Pauley Island?
Yeah, but that had really nothing to do with that. That had to do with the guy that was one of the survivors, just happened to live there. That's the guy I talked to. I was going to visit Pauley Island to interview that guy, but then he basically was too traumatized from their annual convention to meet with me and has since not called me back. So William Pauley is the guy, he's the like hundreds of millions of dollars who has this massive yacht, lives in Miami, and the CIA used him and his yacht to bring a whole bunch of quote unquote Cuban exiles, Operation Gladio people, to the island of Cuba for an invasion. They launched an invasion off this man's yacht. So, another guy, I can't believe I missed him. Gordon McClendon, who was in charge of KLIF. Oh yeah, he's a Yale graduate too. World War II interpreter. So he was in the OSS. He's the guy that founded Liberty Broadcasting System. Oh yeah, so he's the CIA media guy in the bunch. And let's see, George Smathers, who was on the finance committee in the Congress. Richard Russell, who is from Georgia, and also part of the military industrial complex. James Eastland, part of the Judiciary Committee. Benjamin Jordan, part of the Senate Rules Committee. Fred Black, who was ServU Corporation. So the ServU Corporation was a vending thing that basically had all kinds of mafia and CIA ties. I think we're going to get to that because Bobby Baker, we are going to talk about him. He was big into the ServU Corporation, which has mafia ties and Operation Gladio all over it. So this is the group of people we're talking about here. So this guy that we're talking about, hold on, let me get back to him. Hold on. Okay, Fred Korth. He's involved in all of this, right? So in the last few months of the administration of Dwight Eisenhower, the Air Force began to argue that it needed the successor to the F-105 tactical fighter, which became known as the F-111 project. In January 1961, McNamara changed the TFX from an Air Force program to a joint Air Force and Navy program. And the reason that was done is because they're in charge of the Navy. They had one of their guys sitting as Secretary of the Navy. 3 of the bids, so they kept sending the bid back because the corporation that they wanted to get it wasn't looking favorable. So each 3 times it came back, Boeing was the company that should have gotten the contract. But they wanted Lockheed to get it because Lockheed was in the Georgia guys, Richard Russell's district. They also did this with another one for General Dynamics. And it soon became clear that Boeing was expected to get the contract. Its main competitor was General Dynamics. General Dynamics was America's leading military contractor. And let's see, more than 80% of the firm's business came from the government. However, the company had lost $27 million in 1960 and lost even more than that in 1961. So General Dynamics was close to bankruptcy. And so it needed to get the contract. And so basically, of course, General Dynamics is in Texas. And so this is what happens. General Dynamics had several factors in its favor. The president of the company was Frank Pace, the guy we just talked about. He's Secretary of the Army. The Deputy Secretary of Defense is Roswell Gilpatrick, who before he took up that post, he was the chief counsel for General Dynamics. The Secretary of the Navy at the time, guess who that is? John Connally, the guy that was the governor of Texas, who was with JFK when he's assassinated. So Connally left the job in 1962. JFK now appointed Korth, the guy we're talking about, as Secretary of the Navy. So that's the reason why they made it a joint Navy project, is so they could steer the projects into Texas. And I watched this happen. This is literally how it happens. Korth not only got the job after strong lobbying from LBJ. A few weeks after taking the post, Korth overruled top Navy officers that had proposed the X-22 contract be given to Douglas Aircraft. Instead, he insisted it be granted to Bell Corporation, which of course is in Texas as well. This created controversy as Korth had been a former director of the company. Korth also became involved in discussions of the TFK contract between Boeing and General Dynamics. Korth was a former president of Continental Bank, which had loaned General Dynamics considerable money. Korth later told John McClellan's committee when it was being investigated that because of his particular position, he had deliberately refrained from taking a direct hand in the decision until the last possible moment. Well, as it's pointed out, the last possible moment means that the 3 times that it had came back with the answer that Boeing was going to get it, he waited until the 4th one, where finally someone was paid enough money to say they're both equal, but Boeing probably would have been better to say, oh, we're going to give it to General Dynamics. So Robert McNamara justified his support for General Dynamics getting it, saying, quote, Boeing had from the very beginning consistently chosen more technically risky trade-offs in an effort to achieve operational features which exceeded the required performance. So they're better, but they can't have it. The TFX program involved the building of 1,700 planes and was worth $6.5 billion. Now, this is going on in 1962, leading up, and now they're starting to investigate it. And all of this shit, again, you've got murders on one hand, you've got government embezzlement and contract rigging on another hand. This is all brewing in 1962, leading into 1963. So on 12 December of 1962, LBJ visits Fort Worth to join in the festivities of General Dynamics having been awarded the contract. So, let me get down here. John McClellan, chairman of the Permanent Investigation Committee, continued looking into the activities of Billy Estes and Bobby Baker. During the investigation, it emerged that LBJ had been involved in political corruption. This included the award of the $7 billion contract to General Dynamics. And when it was discovered that Continental Bank from Fort Worth was a principal money source, that brought Korth into the picture. So Korth, based on this investigation, which culminated in October 1963, Korth is forced to resign from his job in the government as a result of the congressional investigation. So, it is later said that on 22 November 1963, a friend of Baker's, Bobby Baker, by the name of Don Reynolds, told a man by the name of B, and that's just the initial, Everett Jordan, and his Senate Rules Committee, that he saw a suitcase of money, which Baker described as a $100,000 payoff to Johnson for his role in the Fort Worth contract. John McClellan was the chairman of the Senate committee. The assassination happens. This committee is then basically, because Johnson becomes president, doesn't even resume until like 5 years later. Now, here's what's really weird, as if none of that was not weird enough. After resigning from the Secretary of Navy's job, Korth worked as a lawyer. He stayed in Washington because I read his obituary and a couple of other reports about this. He had 2 kids, a son and a daughter that I could find, and a wife. He basically left them. He never divorced. She later got a divorce, but he didn't want a divorce. People around him speculated that he wanted to be estranged from them because he's now a threat. So he stays in Washington. He gets elected to a couple of boards, one of which is located in Dallas, but he basically does his job from Washington. And then later in 1969, his daughter, who is very young, a beauty, she won like 1 million beauty pageants, is murdered, and it's ruled suicide. She was shot in the middle of the day in her home with a 20 gauge shotgun. He lives like another couple of decades. One last guy that I want to cover on this, because I want you to understand what was going on with LBJ is basically a very similar story as to what's going on with Biden right now. And you notice that the more information that comes out in these congressional investigations, the more ramped up all of this gets. This is exactly what was happening with LBJ. And that's the reason why they assassinated JFK. Whether or not Wallace and those people did it, because we also have found out that there was OAS assassins from NATO in Dallas that night too. But it's kind of like all hands on deck moment if you're going to kill the president. But you see the similarities in all of these things happening. I did want to cover this one guy, Bobby Baker, because this guy's crazy. He basically, at the age of 14, and I know what every one of you are thinking, at the age of 14, gets invited to become a page in Washington, D.C. by a senator in South Carolina. Makes you want to go look up who's been pages for the other senator in South Carolina. But anyway, so he gets brought to Washington, D.C. at the age of 14. Who would let their kid do that? I don't know. And unless they're paid a huge sum of money, not that I would do that for money, but I'm just saying, I can't imagine anybody doing it. So anyway, he goes to Washington, he stays there, and he becomes an intricate tool in Washington, D.C., because he is basically like an errand boy there. And he overhears all of these snippets of information. And he had worked for like a grocery store in a small town since he was like 10, running groceries to people. And he realized early on that, strange men would be coming out of other people's houses in the middle of the day, that there was money to be made in the blackmail game. And so he makes like the perfect page in Washington, D.C., because he's already figured all of this out. And he gets introduced to LBJ right after LBJ comes to Washington, D.C. And it says that he approached this young Page saying, "Mr. Baker, I understand that you know where all the bodies are buried in the Senate. I would appreciate it if you would come to my office." When he arrived at the new senator's office, he says, "I want to know who's the power over there, how you get things done, which are the best committees that work." And basically says that he interrogated Baker for like 2 hours. Baker later recalled, quote, "No senator ever had approached me with such a display of determination to learn, to achieve, to attain, to belong, to get ahead. He was coming into the Senate with his neck bowed, running full tilt, impatient to reach the distant goal I then could not even imagine. It was, as I came to know, wholly characteristic of Lyndon Johnson and close to a typical performance. Politics simply consumed the man," unquote. So it became Baker's job to compile background on all the rest of the politicians who basically wine them and dine them using oil money, let their hair down, and then basically get blackmail on them. It says Senator Johnson was very adept at taking care of senators and their wishes and the bills that they wanted paid. Two men came very close when Johnson became the Senate Majority Leader in 1955. He made Baker the Secretary for the Majority. Mr. Baker proved especially adept at what they referred to as Senate math, and that's basically going around buying votes. In early 1950, Baker worked closely with a guy by the name of Fred Black. He also became involved in helping Intercontinental Hotel Corporation, which, by the way, is a CIA front, to establish casinos in the Dominican Republic. Baker arranged for Ed Levinson, who was an associate of Meyer Lansky and Sam Giancana of the Mafia, to become involved in this deal. So this is the CIA getting in bed with the Mafia. When the first of these casinos were opened in 1955, Baker and Johnson were invited on the official inauguration guest list. While working for Johnson, Baker became the epitome of the Washington wheeler dealer sleaze. He repeatedly fronted for syndicate gamblers Cliff Jones and Ed Levinson in investments that earned super profits for himself and military industrialists. His friend Fred Black Jr. in exchange for him to intervene and help Jones and Levinson obtain casino contracts with the Intercontinental Hotel System. So basically the CIA. Bobby Baker, along with Walter Jenkins, Ed Clark, Clifford Carter, were Johnson's bagmen. These are the same guys we just talked about, who would rely upon their relationship with criminals. These men dealt with Irving Davidson, Clint Murchison, James Hoffa, and Carlos Marcello. Davidson was deeply involved in Baker's scams. Murchison paid Baker to secure government contracts for a meat packing company he owned in Haiti while he worked on defending Jimmy Hoffa. In 1960, LBJ was selected by JFK as his running mate. This upset Senator Robert Kerr, who didn't want Johnson going anywhere because Johnson was their money machine. And he basically threw a tissy fit, basically threatening to kill all of them, like literally killing. I can't believe that my three best friends would betray me. Senator Kerr did not seem to be joking. As I attempted to calm him down, he kept shouting that we would ruin the Senate, ruin ourselves, and ruin him. Johnson basically told him to get a grip, that where he was going, things were going to get a lot better. He also added, I knew that, this is Baker speaking, I knew that LBJ had arranged a Texas law permitting him to run for re-election to the Senate at the same time that he was running for vice president with JFK, which kind of what Ron DeSantis just did, so that no matter what, he wasn't going anywhere, which he did get that law passed. And he did run for both, and he was reelected as a senator at the same time he and JFK was elected to the president and vice presidents. So it goes on to say, in 1960, when Johnson was reelected, or excuse me, elected to vice president, Baker remained as Johnson's secretary and political advisor. He continued to do business with Sam Giancana, Ed Levinson, Jimmy Hoffa, Benny Siegelbaum, in the Dominican Republic. Now, again, keep in mind, this is 1960. The Dominican Republic has Operation Gladio units in it, and they are attacking Haiti. Baker argued that the Dominican Republic would be a mafia replacement for Cuba. However, these plans came to an end when the military dictator Rafael Trujillo was murdered on the orders of the CIA, and because he got a little too big for his britches, but then they installed a guy by the name of Juan Bosch, B-O-S-C-H. Baker had already arranged another source of income. In 1962, he established the Servue Corporation, which is this vending machine corporation. He and his friend Fred Black and mobsters Ed Levinson and Benny Siegelbaum set this organization up. Again, it is another CIA front. The machines were manufactured and secretly owned by Sam Giancana. The president of Servue Corporation was Eugene Hancock, who was a business partner of Grant Stockdale's and George Smathers of Automatic Vending Services. Questions were asked about Stockdale's business involvement with Baker, because Baker's becoming like a millionaire on like a $20,000 a year salary, kind of like they do right now. And most of this got exposed, which required, Stockdale, who had been appointed ambassador to Ireland, to resign. Rumors began circulating that Baker was involved in corrupt activities, going back to the time when he worked in the Senate. And even the New York Times said, quote, during his time as a public servant, Mr. Baker has been pursuing various business adventures, real estate, hotels, vending machine companies. In 1963, was an associate of a vending business, brought a civil suit against him, and resulting publicly drew scrutiny of the Justice Department. They wondered, among other things, how Mr. Baker could have become a millionaire on a $20,000 a year job. But here's where it gets really good. All those sexual allegations about JFK? Well, I want you to understand where they came from. In 1961, Baker established a thing called a Quorum Club, Quorum. This was a private gentlemen's club housed in Carroll Arms Hotel on Capitol Hill. Its memberships was senators, congressmen, lobbyists, Capitol Hill staffers, and other well-connected people to enjoy drinks, meals, poker games, and secrets in private accommodations. Time magazine reported, quote, among the 197 members are many lobbyists and government figures, including Senators Frank Church of Idaho, Daniel Brewster of Maryland, J. Howard Edmondson of Oklahoma, Harrison Williams of New Jersey. Among Republicans, Senators, Montana's James Batten and Ohio's William Ayers. This waitress by the name of Ellen Romech, Rometsch. She was supposedly a Elizabeth Taylor lookalike waitress at the Quorum Club. She was born in Germany. It became part of East Germany. So technically, she was not a communist. And they left, they moved to West Germany and then eventually to the United States. She was married to a sergeant in the West German Air Force that was assigned to the German embassy in Washington, D.C., and she gets a job at this gentleman's club. So obviously very scantily clothed. There's all kinds of nude paintings hanging around in this place. I mean, it's a place of debauchery, basically. And Bobby Baker takes an interest in her and takes her on holiday to, of all places, New Orleans, which is like the pit of everything mafia/CIA. One of, next to Miami, of course. One of Kennedy's friends, Bill Thompson, discovers that this woman, Rometsch, at the Quorum Club and asked Baker about her. Baker told him she's a lovely, beautiful party girl. She has good manners and is very accommodating. I must have had 50 friends who went with her, and not one of them has ever complained. So basically, Baker's running a whorehouse in Washington, D.C. And all of the promiscuous accusations about Kennedy, to include, what was the other thing? The Perfuma. All of those accusations stems from this guy right here. The guy that is JFK's butt boy. He's the one that generates all of those accusations of, and I'm not saying that he wasn't promiscuous. I don't know, but I want all of you to understand where those accusations come from. They come from this man right here, the man working for LBJ. And we all know that LBJ was at some part responsible for JFK's assassination. So it's really fun to be able to not only assassinate somebody, but then research their character once you have done that, as basically being a whore dog. And, you know, we had to kill him for the good of the country because we couldn't have it exposed that he was having all of these affairs with East German spies and Soviet spies, when in fact you made all that shit up from the guy that's running the whorehouse for you. So that kind of brings us full circle. And that's where I'll stop on this part of the story. But this type of corruption and this type of it mirrors exactly where we're at with the Hunter Biden laptop and the Joe Biden bullshit, and the embezzlement of money. And I mean, to me, the LBJ one's even worse because of all of the assassinations. I'm sure there's been people assassinated as part of the Biden crime syndicate. But I just kind of felt we needed to bring that full circle as part of the underpinnings for going into the Democrat convention and setting up that whole story. Bridget, Cousin It, did you guys want to go over?
Ma'am, can you drop Cousin It down and bring her back up?
Sure.
And yeah, we can bring some of these requests.
Let me go find her real quick. Okay, I can't find her. Oh, there she is. All right, done.
Thank you.
Sure. Look at Stellar and Trump Frog with their cool looking avatars.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
We look like, come on.
When you said that, I was looking, we were next to each other on my screen. I was like, oh, it looks like Christmas.
It
You know,
does look like
in
Christmas.
July.
Christmas in July. Okay, Miles, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Colonel. I didn't know you were going to do a body count competition. So, but that's okay. Look, you know, I used to read a lot of science fiction, and you'd read about this warrior planet, and the way they advanced on the planet was by murder and assassination. And you get done with the story, and you go, damn, I'm glad I don't live on a planet like that.
But you do.
I know. So, are you going to talk about Hinckley at all?
We can
Sunday?
someday.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Last night, John and Zach kind of did a deep dive on that. These people are all connected, guys. It never stops. The web is huge. The tentacles are everywhere.
Yeah, I
So,
agree.
we'll never get done with our research, but that's good. You know, keeps us busy. And just to brag a little bit, I just got my RSVP to see the president on Saturday. He's going to be in St. Cloud, Minnesota, at Herb Brooks Stadium. It's a hockey stadium. Now it's only 5,100 people. And I don't know if the fire marshal is going to let us to put seats or standing room on the ice. They can cover the ice, but it doesn't matter. They'll have a jumbotron outside. It's going to be great. And if I can broadcast, I will. If I get inside, I'll just videotape stuff because you can't get a signal with all those people in there. So I just thought I'd brag a little bit. I'm
Cool.
going to go see the president.
Cool. Awesome. Yep.
Okay.
And everybody needs to brag about that. I've seen him a couple of times. As a matter of fact, I saw him at one of the Turning Points thing when Rush Limbaugh introduced him down in Miami. So yeah, it's awesome. Cool, cool, cool.
I think CIC had his hand up a little bit earlier.
Okay.
CIC, do you have a question?
Hi, I really am grateful, Colonel Towner, for your presentation this morning. And it's pretty cool. Started out in 1968. That happens to be the year I was born. And my dad got out of Nam in 1967. Or no, 68. Yeah. And he told me a lot of stuff about this when I was, a kid. I could overhear him talking here and there about different stuff. I remember watching the news and just being there with my family, watching the news, going over all the propaganda stuff and everything. And that was really good to hear everything you just said, because it was,
well, we're gonna
really put things into perspective.
Yeah.
And it makes me really realize, why my papa, when I was a kid, I used to get upset about certain news stories and stuff. But my dad would say, it's all bullshit. And I could never figure out why he would tell me that.
Yeah, because it was.
You know what I mean? And then I kind of got it later, especially when I learned about, in 2016, and I started learning about the Q thing, and things really started kicking in. And I really started remembering things my pop taught me.
That's cool.
Well, you know what I mean? And so I could pick up on things and I could really relate to it because I could hear kind of some of the jive. It jived. It just seemed right.
Right.
And I was attracted to it.
Well, stick with us because we're going to get to Asia, as Cousin Nick keeps telling me that we have to. And
Yes,
we're going to
yes.
do a multi-day exposure of what really happened in Vietnam, not the story we've been told.
That's excellent. And I'm really excited about that because, you know, and my father is probably, I'm sure, in heaven and got a tear running down his face, being real proud that I'm sitting here listening to you. So I want to thank you, Colonel Towner. I really do.
God bless you. Thank you for being
God
here.
God bless you.
Thank you for being here. You're going to make me cry. All right.
Yeah, me too.
Who's next?
Really didn't mean to.
Yeah, okay, sure you didn't. No, you know what? Your dad is proud. He's looking down and he's proud. So, you know, thank you for coming here and finding us. That's important. And we're going to make sure that we do your dad proud.
Yep, absolutely.
That's why we're doing this.
I salute every one of you.
Thank you. Thank you. Who's next, Bridget?
The Dem.
The
The
guy
Dem-
trolling the Democratic. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I was
Hello?
on that.
Oh, hello. Yeah, I just wanted to, this is perhaps a little tangential, but I noticed in the title of the talk, you make reference to the 1968 election, and I have been doing a fair amount of reading on the RFK assassination and also the 1968 RFK campaign very quickly, because I know this is kind of tangential to what you were talking about, but one of the things that I was really shocked me because I do tons of reading on Cold War history. I'm like, oh, fascinating. I feel like that was when the projector was made and they got us watching films, so to speak. So what I learned, what I was, surprised that I had not heard this before was that RFK suggested to Martin Luther King the 1968 Poor People's Campaign, during which MLK was assassinated. And I'm like, wait, why am I like 57 years old? I've been reading Cold War history all the time. I never heard this before. Calcuria over here. And then what's also never mentioned is that MLK was backing the 1968 RFK campaign.
Yes, he was.
Now, what you have the so-called left over here claiming to be for the working class, and you would think that given the demographics of the 1968 RFK campaign, they would be screaming from the rooftops on this about what it shows, versus they say the U.S. elections are, fake, some of them say. Well, why aren't they pointing to this example of it? But the kicker is this. After a while, I kept on reading and I'm like, United Auto Workers president Walter Reuther, who was like a big name guy. He used to be in the history books before they got, quasi erased, from back in New Deal days. Well, he pulls the United Auto Workers out of the pro-continue the Vietnam War branch of the Democratic Union leaders, that is the AFL-CIO, and joins RFK in the 1968 RFK campaign. He has his first plane crash in October 1968. His second one is the one in which he dies. He survived the first one, is in 1970. So basically what we're looking at, and the
Wait a
United
minute.
Auto Workers-
Wait a minute. RFK was assassinated.
Yes, I know. Yeah, RFK was assassinated June 5th of 68,
Right.
and MLK was assassinated also during the RFK campaign, April 4th, 68.
Right.
So Walter Reuther, his first plane crash was before.
Oh, you're talking about the UAW guy.
Right, and
Okay.
this is really a big guy, but a big deal guy, because most of the coffins coming back from Vietnam are not exactly your upper class and middle class
Correct.
professors.
Correct.
Newsflash. So when the unions turn against the Vietnam War, agencies listen.
Well,
And
have you discovered the fact that the UAW donated money to the Weather Underground crowd that was instigating a lot of the 1968 turbulence at the DNC convention?
well, I think what you're suggesting here, perhaps I'm incorrect, is the UAW was funding what we now know as SDS, and the Weather Underground emerged from that. So
Correct.
there's some definitely overlap there.
Yeah.
And
Because
however-
we talked about that yesterday in our presentation. This is day 2 of this, and both
Okay, I'm sorry.
the United. Oh, that's fine. I'm just letting you know the United Packing House Union, Ralph Hellstein, was also involved in this, and they donated money to the Weather Underground's SDS movement, and they
Right.
also, that guy Ralph introduced those Mark Rudd, Tom Hayden, and Harry Edwards, kind of the leaders of that element, to Saul Alinsky in Chicago.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's I have not read very much on that, but there's no question in my mind that CIA would be up in that as well. But I guess what I'm saying is these are not necessarily contradictory informations.
Correct.
It doesn't necessarily mean that UAW President Walter Reuther, in joining MLK and RFK, was not sincere in what he was doing. And also, I think it's critical to point out that the UAW was the most racially, now think about this in terms of today's Democrats and the contrast. He was the most, the UAW was the most racially integrated of the large national unions. So think of the racial composition of Vietnam, and how we are constantly told that, by today's Democrats, it's almost all race and no class. Well, here you have, UAW, RFK, and MLK with the Poor People's Campaign that RFK had suggested. That campaign is ending in 3 assassinations, the last in 2 plane crashes.
Right.
And our so-called emphasis, in my opinion, so-called left,
Right.
never says a word about it.
Correct. Well, because they're not ever interested in what they actually say they're interested in. They're interested in organized chaos so they can implement control. That's called the strategy of tension. That's actually a thing. It was
Right.
devised in the late 1800s. And that is their method of madness. They use any section of society as the victim, and they accuse everybody else as the aggressor, and then they orchestrate the chaos accordingly.
Right. Well,
And they're doing that right now, which is why
Yes.
we talk about it. Because
Absolutely.
they are doing it right now. So
Absolutely.
it's recognizing the patterns. So welcome to the group, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, in my opinion, it's also very relevant to. There's a historian named Hugh Wilford who wrote a book called The Mighty Wurlitzer about how CIA created a fake left, right? Because look, if you and I are fighting and I spend the whole time punching at your kneecaps, who's going to win, right? In other words, get the left talking about stuff that will never work, that raises up, kind of problematic thing, perhaps, if, the so-called leftists are reading CIA-controlled fake left journalism, ... That's a whole nother can of worms here that, maybe maybe we should put on the back burner because I don't want to talk too long. But thanks for your show. It's extremely informative. I'm glad that this information is getting out. It's really encouraging.
So
Sorry.
that's okay. So what you just described as in the fake left is called Operation Gladio. And that is the premise of our entire program here, is revealing what Operation Gladio is. And the elements that orchestrate Operation Gladio, we refer to as the International Syndicate, and they're kind of the puppet masters of the entire thing. But this fake left has been established in every government, every country that they want to overthrow the government in. So you're absolutely right in your observation. And again, thank you for being here. Sharon?
And if you you may want to go to the colonel's profile. You know, if you click on her profile, right, the pinned post that's right underneath her profile has a recording of all of our spaces, and they're broke out by country, as well as you can look at and listen to the one that we did yesterday. That might help, you know, if you enjoyed
Right.
this one, I'm
Okay,
sure
will
you'll
do.
enjoy that one too.
I will. Thanks very much.
All right, Sharon, go ahead.
Are you talking to me?
Yes.
Sharon or Stellar or the other Sharon? Sorry.
You.
I, in the last few days, I mean, I knew we had corrupt presidents and stuff. And, you guys have heard me say before, I knew that Clinton was bad, but I didn't know how bad, and then, my eyes opened up when Obama was in to a lot of the, to this whole thing, but hearing about Nixon, hearing about Johnson, and hearing about all these other ones, it's like, did we, besides Trump and JFK, did we ever, or maybe Abe Lincoln too, unless there's dirt on him that we don't know about, but
Oh, we know about it.
seriously. Okay, well, that's what I was gonna say, you guys know about it, but it's like,
In the
It's just
last
mind-blowing.
120
It's just-
years, in the last 120 years, to my knowledge, the only two good guys that we've had past like the late 1800s was JFK, and he only got in under a ruse. He got in because his dad helped him with the mafia, and then he turned on him. Trump is the only one elected and campaigned on what he was actually going to do and did what he said he was going to do. JFK kind of had to play the game in order to get into office, and with his dad's help. Trump is the only one that did it on his own, saying exactly what he was going to do and doing exactly what he said he was going to do. Does that help?
Yeah, it's just mind blowing though. I mean, completely mind blowing.
I agree.
Yeah, it really is. And like we were talking yesterday, like what you brought up yesterday, and yesterday's one was probably one of the biggest mind blowing ones ever, even though I knew that they were shady, but there's going to be a comfy, cozy place in hell for them.
That's all you can do. Is we have to know what they did in order to prevent them from doing it in the future. But you have to know that these people will meet God and they are going to hell. So
And then like how you were talking about like how these other countries and stuff, and you're going to be talking about Vietnam in the future, but like the ones you were talking about like in South America and these different places, it's just, and then now seeing what's going on, and because I wasn't in those countries, as so it would have been huge if I lived there, but what's happening here, to me, and I'm sure with everyone here too, it's like our entire world is just like, wow, it's being shattered, challenged in every direction. When we thought that our government was, and the politicians and all that other stuff are supposed to be protecting the people, and in reality, they're not.
Correct.
And they're only trying to protect their own pocketbooks
correct.
at the people's expenses.
Correct.
And it's happened all over the flipping world. That's
Correct.
what's so freaking bizarre.
Yes, it is. Sharon, go ahead.
Hi, Colonel. I'm sorry. I was slow at hitting the button.
That's
all
okay.
go. Hi, Bridget and Cousin It. Listen, really appreciate this. Having been raised in Dallas, I was a junior in high school in 1963, sitting in typing class whenever they announced that President Kennedy had been shot.
Oh, God bless you.
So, yeah, I have lots of memories, and of course, we watched the shooting of Lee Harvey Oswald on our big 13-inch screen TV, black and white, in a huge cabinet. But yeah, you're bringing a lot of things that I witnessed, but wasn't really aware of some of the stuff I've witnessed. So I really appreciate you covering this, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you for being here, Sharon, number one. And number two, I know how it feels when this storyline hits close to home. It's done that for me multiple times. And when you realize growing up, and I lived in Texas. I was stationed at Randolph Air Force Base in San Antonio. Absolutely love Texas. And obviously there's this underbelly to everything. And I did not see any of that when I lived in Texas. And for and you can only imagine the immense wealth of the oil industry. And I guess, it never dawned on me that with that comes all of the corruption and underbelly part of it. That just Texas has always been this place that most of us have all of these, impressions of what it would be like to live there, because, everything's big in Texas, but so is the corruption. And so much of our history evolves around Texas. I mean, the whole Bush Empire evolved around Texas, and the James Baker and all of those people, all products of some aspect of Texas. Not that they were all originally from there, because the Bushes certainly weren't, but they definitely went to Texas to get some of that rich oil kind of stink on them. And as a result, there ended up being a lot of corruption there. And LBJ, I mean, I've been up to his ranch when I was stationed in Texas. As a matter of fact, we went up there several times over the weekend with my daughters. And I was shocked. I was shocked at the level of corruption and how many dead bodies surrounded that man.
I'm right with you there. And something else that my ears picked up on was whenever you mentioned KLIF. Was that KLIF 1190?
Yes.
Because that's what I grew up listening
Yes.
to.
Yeah. And
Yes.
that guy was in the middle of it. Is that crazy?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. He was definitely on the inside of the corruption.
We were naive.
Yes, we were.
That's all I can say.
But not no more.
No more. Thank you.
Sure. Do we got any other questions?
I have a quick question.
Sure.
So the way that they were able to bamboozle the public and everything is because they were very limited on what they would feed to the public. Is that why we just really didn't know, or just like there was just so many pieces out there and just being able to connect it all together? I mean, or do you think it's just more readily available now for us to find for these for like you guys, because it's you guys that found this stuff, for us to be able to connect the dots with all these different things? I mean, how were they able to bamboozle us for all these years is what I'm trying to ask.
Stellar. They killed
Operation
people.
Mockingbird.
They killed people. Anybody that talked got whacked. That's a very strong incentive for you to shut up. People saw that. It scared the living shit out of people to the point where they didn't want to say anything. They didn't have witness protection back then, or whistleblower, sorry, not witness protection. And when you went to the government, you never knew who was in and who wasn't in the clique. So it only takes a couple of times for people to go to Congress or go to a governor trying to expose shit, and they find out that they end up dead, that all of a sudden nobody's going to be talking anymore. Now, as far as the difference between now and then, obviously, is the internet. there is so much information out there. There's almost too much information from that perspective to weed through. And what they have done with like Google and all of that other stuff is they put all the shit up front. If there was a way that you could reverse search on something, that the thing they want you to least find, you could get that first, like turn your entire search thing upside down. That would save a whole lot of time. Because when you're doing this, even when you use FreeSpoke or Brave or some of these other browsers, you have to weed through pages and pages and pages of garbage in order to find stuff. That's why I like using archive.org, because archive.org allows you to search on keywords, and it's going to bring up, no matter whether it's a newspaper, a book, or a video that has it in the description or whatever. It's an excellent search tool that gets you going in the right direction. And then what I do is, once I find a couple of very good sources and I can read through, I've told y'all all, I don't like reading stuff on archive.org like a book, because I need to write in the margins and in order to bring the information to you guys. And I have a method. I circle names and I circle companies, and then I highlight important facts about both. So when I'm looking for something, even when I have an index and I've looked at somebody's name, like this Hunt guy, I can go to the books that I know I read about him in. I go to the index, I find the page that he's in, and it takes me 5 seconds because I have his name circled. I can't do that when I use archive.org. So I only use archive.org to initially research the book, look at all of their indexes and references, check them out. And if I find them credible as an author, I will buy their book. And it is only after I buy their book and I've read it at least once with all my highlights that I will bring the information to you guys, because I have to be thoroughly convinced that the author is authentic. And where they're not, I tell you. I've been very open where I disagree with some of the authors' assumptions. I love the facts, but then if they go, well, if this and this is true, this must be true. And the best example of that was Whitney Webb. I came away from several of her quote unquote conclusions with completely different conclusions. But when we do our book reviews, I tell you why I think that, so that you can make your own decision. I'm just bringing you information. I want you all to do your own research and form your own conclusion. And I don't expect you to agree with me on everything. I want you to come back here after you've done your own research and you've looked at everything and say, you know what? I don't agree with you on this particular point. And I want to know why you don't agree with me, because I may change my mind. Cousin It, go ahead.
Why do you always catch me when I step away from the phone?
I don't know. It's a talent. Maybe I have your
I
phone
know.
spied on.
I don't know how. It's got painter's tape all over the damn thing. One of the things that I wanted to remind everybody is Friday at 4 o'clock. For those of you that are new here, there's going to be Friday at 4 o'clock Eastern Time, a round table where we're going to have people that are very knowledgeable in things like finance, Q, foreign affairs, Operation Gladio, etc. And everybody's going to bring their knowledge to the table. Oh, and computers. I remember USR. So everybody's going to bring their own, superpower to the table. So hopefully that will help people discern what's actually going on. Because one of the things that these evil bastards like to do is to keep everybody in a perpetual state of, I don't want to say terror, right? But I mean, really, it's like, look here, no, look there, look here, look there, look here, look there, to the point where you get overwhelmed and you're shut off. These people can maybe help refocus to the issues that are going on, and get everybody, kind of onto the same path, and a little less, I hate to use the word frantic, but there's a lot of crap going on right now. and rumors. And everybody, you know, we're still waiting for proof of life, so I'll give everybody that. But the parallels to 1968 are very important. And, you know, these are the kind of things that if you look back and see what they've done, you can sort of predict what they're going to do. Because at the end of the day, these people aren't really very bright. And as it's been pointed out, it's usually familial lines. So it's like if the father's corrupt, you know, good chance that the kids are involved in some way too, because the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So you find that a lot. You know, again, welcome to all the new people here. Stay strong. You're not alone. If you have any questions, you know, you're always welcome to ask. We're happy to help you through it all because we know it's confusing. And I think that's about it. Yeah, okay, so Friday we talk. Okay, yeah, that's about it. So welcome to everybody.
Thanks. Mike, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Colonel. Good afternoon to the rest of you, especially Bridget and Cousins. I wanted to add to dovetail off of the Colonel's answer to Stellar's question around why is this information like getting dispelled or getting disseminated more easily now than it was back then. On top of the use of violence and death to fear the population from thinking certain things, as well as Operation Mockingbird, which I believe Bridget or Cousin Ed mentioned. There's also an aspect of when you have centralized control of the messaging, it can act as a positive feedback loop for the Operation Mockingbird complex, to where when you aren't getting this information from who you believe to be credible sources, because like due to the following and the people that live in that environment, it acts as like an external suppression mechanism. Versus today, when we have so many different sources of information where we can cross-reference and cross-check and analyze all the information and be able to come to our own conclusions, we also have a slew of different outlets that are providing different input and different sources of information. So like we can all like have these conversations in like live right now, on top of the speed of telecommunications, being able to disseminate this information so quickly and so broadly that nowadays they try to keep up these same games, but they can't. They clearly struggle to try and keep the information from getting out that they want to keep suppressed.
Excellent point, Mike. Thank you very much. Go ahead, Stellar.
Just as we're closing up, something else just popped in my head because, you know, we were talking about Richard Nixon and, you know, LBJ and all them. 68 was all that stuff was going on. Nixon got into office, I guess, right after that, or, you know, 69 is, I guess, when he came in. And then the financial system changed in 71. What's going on now with the financial system, and why are they so angry with Trump being in there? And Mike just mentioned the centralized system as far as, you know, the information flow, Operation Mockingbird, they controlled it all through the centralized system. And, you know, we're going from that centralized system into a decentralized, but because of what's going on with the monetary systems, it really does seem like these really big, huge things that happen within our government seems to be tied to a lot of these banking things or market things too. Don't you think? Kind of, or no?
Yeah, no, I think all of that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, all of that plays in.
One of the links that I posted up, I'm trying to see if it was the last one. No, it's the second to last one from Spartacus Educational. It goes through a lot of the people she was covering, as well as the what do you call it? Oh my gosh, brain fart. So anyway, it goes through a lot of different links to the finances, and it was funny because when I posted it, I even said, I thought to myself, I should tag Stellar in this. I thought, no, she looks at a lot of the stuff. So, but it goes through the military complex. That's what I was trying to think.
Yes.
Military industrial complex, as well as like she was talking about how they're manipulating markets with the guy with the cotton and all of that. There is definitely ripple effects from this that they are using to line their own pockets and to enhance their bank accounts at the same time, like we said yesterday and talked about, reducing the amount of money we have, because they want to keep us dumb, poor, and unhealthy. And that's their way of controlling us. And they think that only if they can keep us dumb, poor, and unhealthy, that'll be the only way that they can control us. Anyway.
Yeah, I use Spartacus educational.com for a lot of research. As a matter of fact, it's one of the first places I go to look a person up. They have a great search engine. They go back and they do British history as well as American history, the wars. And yeah, they've got a lot of information on there. And I have, to the best of my ability, vetted them in addition to comparison with books and a lot of the source material that they use. And I'm fairly confident, I'm highly confident that everything, I've not found an error yet on their page. So I highly recommend them if you're interested in doing your own research.
One of the things that was really pretty interesting that we found is that Quorum Club is actually still in existence. They just moved to change the name.
Yes.
So it's called the 116 now. If anybody wants to do any more research on that, it's the 116 Club.
Yeah.
And they're still going strong. So
they actually have several.
And the guns.
Yeah, they have several that I've ran
Yes.
across that are basically just like whore dog clubs.
Right. Bridget, you want to tell them about the guns? My phone's acting up again.
Oh, yep, no problem. One of the things you can give me just a half a second. Cousin, it happened across when we were in the middle of doing this. Well, hang on. It was.
Go ahead and do it, Cousin It.
Was the course? Okay.
Because my phone is
you are-
overheating.
Right. That course, there was a course pistol. And so anyway, that we were talking about going into a research on that because there's just a bizarre coincidence. That there was a specifically, let's say they were developed circa 1982 by renowned German gunmaker Willy Korth. And it makes you wonder, and it just like we always talk, every time you kick over a rock, 6 snakes slide out. We've found companies, several different gun manufacturers. One that was bought by the Red Cross back at the end of World War II in order to evade sanctions. And then another one that, Anschutz, that came out through another project. I mean, it's just, there is no end. You can follow these lines out. But the best we can, we're at least following the threads and patterning. And once you see the pattern, boy, you can't unsee it. You just can't unsee it. You see it everywhere. And then all of a sudden the power that they had over us in the past, they don't have anymore. Because you're no longer afraid when they're trying to bluster.
Yep, that's the case. All right, we're at our 2-hour point. So I don't see any other hands. Do you guys have any hands?
I just want to say thank you.
Oh,
This is an awesome space and it's so relevant to what's going on right now. So I just wanted to give you a big applause to you and your wonderful team of people. It was an amazing space.
thank you.
Just been busy working, so I couldn't chime in, but just wanted to show love. I think you're awesome.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Hi, Froggy. Love you too.
Much love, peeps.
Okay, guys. So tomorrow from 1 to 3, I am going to be doing a second show, which will just be a beginner's 101. Nothing that you advanced students need to be concerned about, but I did want to let you know because it'll be broadcast over to Twitter in like that passive way where you can't like interact, called The Missing Link. I was on there a few months ago. He wanted to have me back on to just do like a Gladio 102 level, because all we got to was the very, very beginning, like its history and the terminology type thing. We didn't actually get to talk about any of the countries or the coups or anything. So we're just going to do a high level pass over some of the pieces we've put together, like the World Wildlife Fund and all of that other stuff. Not anything that we haven't already covered on here. And then, like the lady said, on Friday at 4 o'clock, but we're also Friday morning. I just got invited while we were on here. We set up the date and time on Friday morning at 9 a.m. A constitutional scholar and his protege, Warhamster, is going to be doing a 1 hour workshop on the constitutional issues of Kamala Harris assuming office. There's lots of different conversations going on about that. This guy is, according to Warhamster, like the constitutional scholar, up with Chris Ann Hall level constitutional scholar. And Warhamster has been studying under him the Constitution for years. And basically the two of them, I'm going to be the audience and ask them the questions that you guys would want to have asked. I'm not an expert in that area. I know what the Constitution says, but I want to hear their presentation and their back and forth, and I'm going to be there to represent you guys. So that's going to be at
That's
9.
fantastic.
Yeah.
That's
You said-
fantastic.
Is that 9 o'clock Eastern?
9
9 o'clock?
a.m. 9 a.m. Eastern. Yes.
Okay, so 6 o'clock, I got to set my alarm. That's why.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's so many different interpretations of
Yes.
the Constitution. That's the problem.
Well, actually, just from a philosophical perspective, the Constitution says one thing, and because the jurisprudence changed from a constitutional-based legal system to a precedent-based legal system, when you have decisions like Roe or Dred Scott or any of those other things, they become a precedent, and it takes an overwhelming big deal in order to have it readdressed in a kind of a unique angle in order to be able to then overturn something like Roe or Dred Scott. And the problem with this particular issue is there are some elements that are crystal clear as to what they mean, but there has been laws that conflict with the Constitution that have been passed and never contested. So he's going to tell us what the Constitution says. And he's going to tell us what the real answer ought to be. And then what you normally have to do is continue to file law cases until you get the right answer based on the Constitution. Unfortunately, because that's exactly what had to happen with Roe. The right answer all along was the federal government has no damn business in the abortion question at all. It should have never went to the Supreme Court. It should have always been left to the states, period. But unfortunately, you have an activist court every once in a while, and they make a decision, and because they changed our legal system to precedence, then it has precedence until it doesn't. So we're going to talk about that on Friday. But
Thank you.
That's
Thank
one of
you. So
mine.
excited.
okay. So we will see you here tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern time. Thanks for being here, everybody.
Ma'am, yes, ma'am. Thank you.